Peace, y'all. It is I, the Energy Master, and you are watching the Leopard in the Mirror, Canticle of the Mutant Guardian lecture series. This is season 2, episode 1. In the first season, of course, I went ahead and tackled the whole Canticle, the whole epic poem part of the book. If you don't have said book, that's what it looks like. Make sure you grab that on Amazon. Make sure you go back and watch the poem portion of the series. That can help catch you up. But if you're a quick reader, go ahead and just grab you a physical copy off of Amazon real quick. And so we're gonna get into the back matter of the book, appendix, commentary, all of that. That's where the juice is. So it's like, so yeah, okay, it sounds like a cool, nice story as far as the poem and all that is concerned, but that's not even the point. This is the juicy stuff that we get into. And so I actually wanted to show you something special that just happened. So I was debating when I was going to go ahead and record these. I'm trying to record them live on Facebook first, and then I scheduled them to premiere on YouTube, and that will not be happening until, let's see, whatever the first Monday is in August. So let's see. So if my math is mathing as it should, then next Saturday should be the first, making that Monday the 3rd, and that is my daughter's birthday. So I will not be doing anything but birthday stuff that particular day. And so, but because I record them live here on Facebook, it will premiere on there, and I would love to have a few episodes in the can ready to premiere so that I can go outside and play. And so like I said, I record these live on Facebook first, then I upload them to YouTube. And if you are watching on YouTube now, make sure that you go ahead, hit that subscribe button, hit that like. But otherwise, we're gonna get busy. If you watched last season, you may also notice that there isn't much on my whiteboard this time. I usually do like a design or something on there for the title page and all that. But in this part, in season 2, I need all this space so that I can write on here. We're going back to whiteboard lectures like I do in some of my other videos. And if you want to check out some of those on my YouTube channel, make sure you do that. And you just type in Energy Master, look for my little insignia and all of that good stuff. All right, but I wanted to show you this thing or whatever. So if you remember from season 1 when I was talking about the front matter of the book or whatever, and the challenges that come along with doing a project that is in collaboration with an LLM. We need to stop calling the AI because it isn't exactly artificial intelligence yet. It is a large language model, meaning that it's basically a mirror of your own thoughts being communicated back to you in a lot of ways. But there's nuance to it. And one place that does not play at all when it comes to that stuff is the U.S. Copyright Office. So it is incredibly difficult to get a copyright with anything having to do with AI because the way the law works, you cannot copyright things that have been produced solely with AI or whatever. So as opposed to even trying to flex or try to pretend, that because that wasn't the purpose of this. It wasn't trying to make something look good. It was to show you what happens when you take initiatory knowledge and all the things that I've learned and the things that I teach, and then I try to teach it to an LLM or whatever. That was the point of this project. And so with this, the bulk of what I actually have a claim to is this is original artwork by myself and my daughter that's on here. Everything that's in the back matter is my own thoughts and written with no help. And then I wanted to make sure I did that and put that alongside with the Canticle so you could see, yeah, a lot of thought went into this, and I am more than able, but it's not to prove anything, it's to teach something, because each one teaches one according to their own knowledge, right? But I just wanted to show y'all this. I don't even know how many copyrights I have now, because I started getting my first copyrights all the way when I was like 8 years old, drawing cartoon characters. My mom was showing me how that works, doing poor man copyrights. And then when I got older, learn how to file these online and all of that. But it is particularly challenging to get a copyright with anything having to do with AI. That was the first time I ever had email correspondence with the copyright office, where they reached out and had to clarify this thing or that thing and ask questions about that, and I had to explain this thing or that thing. But after about 2 email exchanges, I got my certificate. And something else I wanted to point out, I think the timing is very opportune or whatever. Well, as you can see, the date of first publication is December 15th, 2025. And if you are watching this today, you are probably already aware that the release date for Black Panther 3 was just announced at San Diego Comic-Con, and it will be exactly 3 years from the date of the publication of this book. It will be Black Panther 3, starring what's your boy's name? Jonathan no, not Jonathan. Something Johnson. David Johnson, that's right. David Johnson is the new Black Panther. He is playing T'Challa's son. He's an adult. And that will be releasing December 15th, 2028. And so that's one of those synchronicities. You see my mutant leopard is throwing up his Wakanda forever, but you know, as I explained in the previous season or whatever, that is actually so an X in general is the Nisibiti. So the Nisibiti from Nigeria. So the Nisibiti symbol for leopard is actually an X. And I made this into a sneaky hidden reference to the Nisibiti symbol for mirror. So it's reflection. So this whole idea of leopard in the mirror. So this is literally a leopard that's inside the symbol for mirror thought. All right, let's get busy, because we got a lot to do, a lot to talk about. I'm gonna try. I feel like I tried to keep the length of each of these chapters, or at least titled parts of the appendix and commentary, to a reasonable length. So I should be able to do a full section per episode. So that's the pace I'm gonna try to do it. We're gonna fill it out with this one. If it's going like super long and taking me like 3 hours to get these shots off, I will be reformatting, figuring that out. But all right, so maybe let's talk about these graphics first. It's at the doorway to the appendix and the commentary. So as you can see, I got my leopard symbol, and he appears to be on a gravestone. So that is mostly dedicated to my son. And if you don't know that story, you should go back through season 1, because it is very, very central to this work in particular. All right. Okay, so the Sirian Image. So in time, you will come to understand why I call it that. I believe I explained that in the text. Just to kind of give you an idea of what you're looking at here. So you got what appears to be a little glyph of something similar to like you got like a little face with the little eyes and a mouth. It looks like he's got like some antlers or something like this. So we'll get a little more into what that is in a little bit. Also, it appears to be projecting out of a screen. It could be a cell phone or a tablet of some sort. And you see this image down that's on the screen, and it's being projected out of it. So we'll talk a little bit about what that is, why that is, and Sirian, of course, being derived from Sirius, which is a star, if you didn't know that. and we'll get a chance to talk about why any of that makes sense. And you know, there is something else that's on my mind before we get busy, because, you know, depending on what your background is, if you're watching me, I'm guessing that this is something that is already of interest to you. But, you know, the things that we go into depth about and things we talk about, you know, we can't assume that everybody sees the significance of why you're doing something. And that's why we overlook and we discount and filter out a lot of things. And, you know, there's some of those things that we overlook due to our immediate concerns and needs. It's those overlooked things that tend to come back around and bite us in the butt. You know, because it was easier to handle when it was just a little bug. It was just a little something that bugs you. But once it becomes an infestation up under your floorboards and the termites done ate out the foundation, you don't even realize that the termite was a problem until the whole house collapses around you, right? So I'm not saying, nor am I denying, that this may or may not be one of those things that comes back around to bite you. But I say all that to say, you know, I saw a post, the internet is what the internet is, and I started thinking about the blurred community, the black anime community, all of that stuff right there. I'm like a day walker when it comes to that. Like I'm like the Blade of of anime stuff, because it's like I grew up, you know, a variety of neighborhoods. I grew up. I was one of those folks who could hang with any crowd or whatever else, and I think my draw to things like anime were that only me and a couple other people even knew about it at the time. So it was more one of those things of, y'all ain't up on this for me, and that's what got me into it. Whereas you got people that, you know, they were basically born into a world where anime was popping everywhere. Like I remember when you used to have to smuggle Pokemon cards, Japanese Pokemon cards across the border in Mexico, and I ain't even exaggerating. Like the early days was a wild, wild west down here in this part of Florida. You know what I'm saying? And so it was more of that for me. But then, so I'm saying that because once the gate got open for just about, you know, all sorts of people to be in there, the people who identify with that anime community can be blinded to their own harshness in some ways. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like you go from being a crowd that is traditionally bullied by others to building a community in which you become the bully. Like they quick. Oh my God! Like if you've been around, you know how it is. It ain't even a simple debate. It's like folks say stuff that they would not say if they actually stayed on the block or something like this, because they know somebody gonna punch you in your mouth or whatever. But it's one of those kind of environments where if you were to react to something like that, then everybody's going to collectively be like, "Oh, look at you upset over nothing," and da. But it was one particular cat. You know, he was expressing, you know, something that he was kind of offended by in the anime or whatever else. And then everybody collectively from that same community, it wasn't even folks from like outside, people from that particular community ganging up, and everybody, the majority of the comments are like, nobody cares. Why does, you know, it's not even that big a deal. Well, that's the reason we have so many suicides and stuff like that, you know, in you know, communities like that, because just because something seems small to you doesn't mean it's not somebody's world. If somebody clearly expresses that they care about something, the stupidest thing you could say to them is no one cares. Because it ain't even talking about you got to agree with them. What I'm saying is, just from a logical standpoint, you can't say no one cares if you're responding to somebody who clearly cares about the thing. So now you're a liar. You see what I'm saying? So it's already a cognitive dissonance right there or whatever. But to have that be said in the anime community, I could easily come from the outside and be like, why all y'all bitch ass niggas like anime anyway? You know what I'm saying? Like, nobody care about that. Ain't none of y'all getting money. Like, I ain't saying that's my attitude toward it, but then I'm just showing you how easy it is for somebody to discount something that you care about, just like you're doing it to somebody else. So it just goes back to that treat thy neighbor as thyself. You know what I'm saying? The golden rule. You know what I mean? You ain't got to be religious to understand that. But I digress. Let's get into it, y'all. It's the energy master. That's what I'm supposed to do. So I ain't gonna apologize for, each one teach one. All right, let's get into it. Let me read this. It says, within itself and in its coloring, seemed to be painted with our human likeness, so that my eyes were wholly focused on it. As the geometer who sets himself to square the circle and who cannot find, for all his thought, the principle he needs, just so was I on seeing this new vision. I wanted to see how our image fuses into the circle and finds its place in it. Yet my wings were not meant for such a flight, except that then my mind was struck by lightning, through which my longing was at last fulfilled. Dante Paradiso, Canto 33, lines 130 to 141. Dante stopped short right before the goal line, but glimpsed just enough to know there was something more behind the veil. I'm not surprised that he was struck down, because during my first time learning to project my consciousness into the heavens, I was met at the Antares gate by a praying mantis who scanned my mind for the correct understanding before allowing me entry. He found the carbuncle for which he sought and greeted me like an old friend from the block. I was permitted to enter a realm like unto rivers of opal milk and solid clouds of honey. Yet even this experience paled in comparison to what I would see once I learned to exit my body completely, following my son to the other side to confirm that physical death is not the end. I've known all too well that what can't be shown and proven to another may as well be trick knowledge. While anyone can be taught to have a proper out-of-body experience, some need a little more convincing to even consider the possibility. Encountering what I later learned to be my chi in Igbo terms, which is distinct from chi, ki, chi, which is life force in the Asian context, I was shown that all the tools that had been given to me over the previous 2 years in the form of visualizations and math, for which I had not yet comprehended the purpose, would come to be my unique contribution to the great work of awakening people to the other side. After visiting the Adiyogi abode of the Isha Foundation in Tennessee in 2023 and meditating in the Shiva Shrine at Sacred Kashi Ashram in Sebastian, Florida, soon after, the YouTube algorithm saw fit to introduce me to Stan Tenen and the Meru Foundation. Having watched hours of lectures and reading page after page of Stan demonstrating Arabic and Hebrew letters positioned within tetrahedra as shadow projections of fire letters derived from toroidal field geometry, I went to bed that night excited, anxious, and slightly unsettled. Let me see. Did I get into this? So we'll talk about these diagrams in a minute. I think this section is short enough. Stan had his revelation in 1968, 1 year after visiting war-torn Palestine, around the time Allah founded his school in Harlem, and 4 years after the Supreme Mathematics and Supreme Alphabet were developed. It was the same year Dr. King was shot, and the year the oldest known human remains were found in Morocco. It was the year Kubrick and Clarke released 2001: A Space Odyssey. I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if the times had been such that these men would have come together and had a conversation. I had a revelation when I looked at the three visible faces of the tetrahedron projection. If the Hebrew letters and Arabic counterparts were like the mother and father, what if the supreme alphabet, ultimately from English and descended from Phoenician in form, was like the child that was sent to bring peace between them? Because the letter A can mean Allah in both Arabic and the supreme alphabet, Masta in Hebrew, and it's the sound associated with the Hindu creator god Brahma, I first selected the Hebrew, Arabic, and English equivalents of the letter A and placed them each in one of the faces of the tetrahedron. I rotated the tetrahedron in 2D as I placed each letter, simulating the spiral of the galaxy. Little was I aware at the time that I was about to be taken on a journey to learn our ancestral history throughout the cosmos. It would be nearly 2 years after this project before I would learn of my West African ancestry and discover how neatly Igbo cosmology paired with the figure that would ultimately develop out of my tetrahedron letter experiment. All right, so that's enough to deal with right there. Good place to stop. All right, now let's talk about all of this. Okay, so what's being described is something that should be flipping impossible. It should be freaking impossible. I swear. Like as we progress through this, you'll kind of see the steps, but because you may not be familiar with some of the geometric language or some of the components, I put diagrams and stuff within the the book itself. But let's just take it one piece at a time. All right, so this excerpt that starts out the chapter or the section, whatever it is, this is the ending of the Divine Comedy. So the third book of Dante's Divine Comedy is Paradiso, which means paradise, obviously. And he's going through the more dense stages of existence in the earlier books, and went through the process by which we break free of our attachments to the physical world and whatnot. And so by the time he reaches Paradiso in the story, this is essentially him interacting with the aspect of ourself that is more light, energy, vibration, higher field type of experience. So these are the more subtle aspects in our physical experience. And there is a scientific explanation for many of these things. However, the language that was used by ancient esoteric systems was highly specialized, as is the language that's used in the sciences today. So the disconnect is not within truth. The disconnect is often having such specialized jargon and terminology within the field that you're an expert that you can't bridge the gap between you and another. The same thing can be said if you belong to a particular religion. The same thing can be said if you belong to a particular race. There's nuance and specialized jargon that makes it easy for us to encode and decode information among ourselves. And when we have to get into a setting that is more general, more global and stuff like that, sometimes we fall short because we ourselves don't understand the essence of the thing enough to know how to properly translate it to someone else. And as I always point out, and as you can see in in my other lectures, I distinguish the phrase "each one teach one" by specifying that in our what we teach, it says each one should teach one according to their knowledge. So that means I have to be knowledgeable enough of what you understand and the language that you use in order for me to take my knowledge and figure out, okay, what words that are available to them best describe my use of certain terminology, especially when we're using different distinctions for the same word. You know what I'm saying? Like I give this example because it's kind of shocking in practice that it's this way now. But remember, once upon a time, to call something cool because it's interesting or good, that was confusing to people. So it's like so among you and your friends, you understood what you meant by like, oh yeah, that's cool, bro. Whatever, or I'm cool. That meaning I'm all right. I don't need that or whatever. I'm cool on that. Well, if you're talking to like a literalist person, like my daughter, she's on the autism spectrum. She's like, but she's she's not too bad off when it comes to communication. But I'm around enough kids through when she goes to her therapies and stuff like this. There are some kids like they take everything literal. If I were to say something was cool, they'll be like, huh, what do you mean? That thing's not cold. Like thinking about the physical sensation of, coolness. And so that comes down to the way that their brains process semantic reasoning, right? And so, and then by contrast, Kalia, she understands it to the point where she'll instantly, to be a butt, will say something like, if you go like, that's cool, she'll go like, nah, it's hot or whatever, because she and then she'll giggle about it, like showing that, like confirming that she knows what you mean, but she also wants to flip it. You know what I'm saying? Because hey, she gets a lot of that from me. Like I was a jokester. I got my lessons. I did what I was supposed to do at school, but I also enjoyed making people laugh. So leopard in the mirror, you're dealing with your reflection, right? And so anyways, this Dante excerpt, he is discussing these higher faculties, and there's geometry involved and some colorful language. It says, except that then my mind was struck by lightning, through which my longing was at last fulfilled. Essentially what he's really saying is that he finally got it. Like he understood like where we fit in with the picture. But the reason that I have my response talking about Dante falling short is because there's certain things that all right, let's put it this way. So regardless of what culture you belong to now, and regardless of the different categorizations and divisions, we're not going to sit up here and blur the lines and act like those divisions aren't there. But that's kind of the purpose of our existence, because we could have just stayed this one unified thing that is all knowing. And so that's essentially what most people think of when they think of God. But that becomes stagnant and still. And so in order for there to be any type of motion, in order for there to be any type of evolution, in order for there to be any type of learning, if there's to be any purpose for existing in the first place, you have to also create a mechanism by which you can forget and be ignorant of certain things, so that those things can become exciting to you when you rediscover them, right? And so you had to have this mechanism of polarity and division, but in doing so, you're also simultaneously creating a path back to the remembrance. So it's just a game. That's literally the cosmic breath. So it's like, so one of the things that people get twisted and that they don't fully understand, whether it be in a biblical context, whether it be in general spiritual context, whether it be whatever the case may be, this whole concept of the breath of God is distinguished from biological breath, in that it is an expansion and a contraction. It is a distribution and reconnection type of framework. And the way that it works in our reality is that you don't just go back to what things were in the beginning, because you can't return to that state. Like if your potential and then you manifest something, even if you were to destroy all of those things, it's not the same as if you had never done anything at all. It's like I always give the example of how a circle, if this is my starting point, all right, and this is 0 degrees, if I go around and I complete that circle, I end up in the same spot, but now I've gone 360 degrees. I have 360 degrees of experience, not 0 at that point. So 0, it's not the same in that regard, because now I've got a bulk relative to this point. So it's almost like that point has moved right here. So both of these are 0 degrees, non-dimensional, but this 0 degree point has mapped out a path along a vector. And so that path is what gives this bulk here 2 degrees. So the vector that it went around is itself one-dimensional. So we got 0 degree point, we got one-dimensional movement in a single direction, and when it connects back to itself, you end up with an internal experience that creates the 2D figure we call a circle. Okay, and from Dante was talking about squaring the circle in his statement. Well, that's largely, like, this isn't a perfect representation of it, but then the concept basically is related to the attempt to draw a square and a circle that have the exact same overall surface area, and they intersect in a very specific way. But, you know, that's just, it has its applications if you want to get deep like that. But the true significance of it is that we consider a circle to have 360 degrees, just like we do a square, because each one of these corners is a 90-degree turn. And then we designate it like that. So we put those there to show that, one, they're all the same angle, and then two, to show that they are specifically 90-degree angles. And so if I got 4 times 90 degrees, that is 360 degrees. All right. But clearly a square is not a circle. So where's the intersection? Like, how are these things the same? Well, if I do this right here, in here, this intersection, this cross, those are also going to be 90-degree angles. I can do the exact same thing with a circle. So the shared principle is the cross that's within it. So it's the relationship between the center and the perimeter of this thing that gives it its degrees. Okay? Listen to what I said there. It's the relationship between that thing's center and its outward perimeter that gives it dimension, that gives it the expansion. So it's like, so we got to think about what that cross is. And like I just said a minute ago, that X in insibity, this sabity, means leopard. You, like, if you're a black person or a person of color, you, just like a leopard fetus, when it was just a little tiny, little thing in the womb, when it's first forming, it has what we call a native streak. So all of its melanin is just in one streak. And so with a certain set of processes, that pattern it slowly starts to oscillate. So we might get some little noise over here from it. We might get some little noise over here from it. But it's oscillating, and the pattern is changing and shifting relative to that initial straight line, right? Gradually, some of that noise shifts far enough out from the main noise that it becomes independent, and then out from that independent spot, that's where the individual florets start to show up. So that's what happens on a leopard. So it starts from the center on the inside of the surface, and it spreads out. When it comes to you, dear white people, we had to teach all this when it came to drawing cartoons, but then even with the cartoons, they still have a little bit to learn. Now, and what am I talking about? Well, white person, your skin color is pretty much uniform. You have the same color on your palms that you have on the back of your hand. It may seem arbitrary, but it is actually important to understand what a human actually is. All right. My wife and I, we enjoy the animated series Iyanu. It is set in Yoruba land. It kind of touches on the, you see so much of like Greek mythology and even Japanese mythology sometimes. You see all that in our cartoons, but you rarely see our mythology represented in a way to where it's actually entertaining and it's a solid series on a major network like that. And Iyanu is that. And so, but anyways, one of my only gripes with their show, it's probably the only thing, and it's not even that big a gripe. It's just something that I noticed because I understand how the industry works and what they're still trying to figure out how to do effectively. But they've gotten to the point where they draw the hands of a black person such that you have the light color on the bottom, but then you have the dark on the top. But the palms are still blank. And that might not seem like a big deal, but it is probably one of the most important things to African culture and human culture in general, because it shows that the distribution of our melanin is not arbitrary, but it actually follows the same principles of cymatic patterns. If you don't know what a cymatic pattern is, they take a plate, and it's usually either a circle or a square. So, you see how that comes back around full circle, right? Ba-dum-bum. And then they place it flat on the table, and then you can put it on top of a speaker, or you could otherwise hook up, your system such that sound can run through it, and they'll place sand or similar material on top of this plate. And depending on that frequency and depending on the shape of this plate, whether it's a circle or square, certain frequencies are going to reflect back and forth between the center of that plate and the edges of that plate, and it's going to create symmetrical patterns around it. So you've probably seen this, probably just didn't know it was called cymatics. Okay, and why this is important is because specific frequencies that have shown some relevance in some shape or form, like for instance, if they test the vibrational resonance of specific chambers of the pyramid when they go in, and they keep seeing certain numbers show up, and then you go and you look at scriptures or you look at all these ancient writings, and they keep on honing in on these same specific numbers, you at least start thinking, hold up, these folks knew something that I don't know here. So, and what you'll find is, so with those specific numbers, there are specific shapes that come out from that. And when you start looking around the ancient world at the architecture, they're using those exact shapes. And these aren't accidental shapes. Like, these are very intricate and detailed, symmetrical shapes that are in most cases like a 1-to-1 basis with that specific frequency. So if you see that particular shape, you can take it to the bank that it's associated with that particular frequency, which makes you wonder, why are they putting that up in the church cathedral window? Why is this particular symbol on the floor right here, and not just drawn onto the floor, but it's carved in there? That's because it's what we call a waveguide. All right. And so what happens is the pattern that you actually see. So let's say my pattern comes out looking something like this right here. Let's just use that as a simple, easy to draw pattern because I'm using a fat marker. We ain't trying to spend a lot of time on this. And then let's say that same sound sent through a square plate makes something more like this right here. Because it's reflecting back and forth between the edge and that. All right, so the actual lines that you see, that's where the sand is. And so it's got that empty space within it. Now, the interesting thing about that is the sound is actually everywhere that sand is not. So the shape that the sound is in, so it's basically, all right, so when the sound is being sent out and bouncing back, it's interfering with itself. So it's canceling itself out in some places and it's amplifying itself in some places. It's like when two waves, like if I got waves in the water and then one is moving that way and then I got a wave coming from that direction, depending on the strength of it, if they got the same strength, they'll meet in the middle. Like let's say this is like has a height of 2, this has a height of 2. They're going to combine into a height of 4 and then they're going to dissipate as that energy moves and goes on about its business. All right. They might cancel each other. In some cases, they might add on to each other. But in the case in point, these are the concepts I'm talking about when I say something like constructive interference or destructive interference. And then once again, if you're one of them people that can't piece together what any of this has to do with anything, just watch to the end. You can't, if you could tell the whole movie within the first 5 minutes or whatever, it's not a very good written movie or whatever. So that's why I do it the way I do, because I like you getting hit at the end, be like, oh, okay. Anyway, so those wave guides, you should be able to piece together where I'm going with this to begin with. I have lines on my hand. It's not a blank canvas. Neither is it the same color as the other side. That's because there is a reason why the melanin cells, the eumelanin, the dark eumelanin, gathers in those specific positions. I've got some, creases and different types of little lines and stuff in my hand, but the dark melanin only gathers in very specific places. This isn't arbitrary. It gathers in specific places that are associated with the joints on my finger. And so if it's doing the same thing that this sound plate is doing, the assumption is there must be some correlation between sound in the white parts of this and we'll just call it quote unquote sand in these grooves, which are called nodes. So the grooves where the sand gathers is a node. N-O-D-E. All right. And so the reason it does that is because the places where it's white, it's more, the surface skin is more closely attached to what's called the fascia. So the fascia is like this connective tissue / substance that is very has a very high content of water and electrolytes and stuff like that, and it basically serves as what connects all of your, it's like it forms bags, quote unquote, that hold your organs. It's just to connect, it's the thing throughout the body that connects the whole body like that. And when your heart beats, like we kind of understand electrical activity as it relates to like the central nervous system and maybe even the, you know, the nerves and the extremities and stuff. But the part of our electrical existence that most of us don't understand as well is how electrolytes carry signals in a more specialized and more specific ways. You know, like you have larger nerves and those networks, you could think of it like the branches of a tree. Like you've got the thick branches, but then if you go to little limbs, and then from those limbs you look at the little stems that come for the leaf itself, and then on the back of the leaf you see like the little veins and stuff. So think of it that way. So it's like, so once you start getting smaller and smaller and more detail, you have to send those signals in a different kind of way. And so as a result, these flat areas, they carry information in a more wave-like form or whatever, that the total information or the total presentation is communicated by the collective activity of those things as opposed to the individual. So sometimes when you can only see like the little individual pieces of something, you can't really tell as much about what they are and how they're really connected with one another. And this goes back to the conversation we started out with in terms of why the original state had to break itself up and separate. And then how do those things connect to each other? How they stay connected? So the underlying answer is that they're never truly disconnected, but depending on the scale that you're able to observe, things seem separate. So that can be expressed in a positive way or a negative way. In a not so good way, that can turn into generalizations. So whereas it's easier to manage a country when you reduce it to a binary situation, like it's literally like computer binary, where as far as race goes, you got black and white. That's binary programming. That's different from what they had initially in slavery in the Caribbean, where you had three distinct social classes, which were the blacks, the whites, and the colors. The colors were those mixed children who were given a little bit more privileges than the blacks, but weren't given nearly as much, as the whites. And so that creates conflicts between the colors and the blacks, but neither one of them got as much as the whites do. So that was by design. But you come to America where it's largely a binary, and then the other minority groups and immigrants, they sprinkle in and they get in where they fit in, kind of like these nodes. Okay, so if you want to look at America in terms of my hand, you could say you got white America on one side, you got black America on another side, and then in these nodes is where, in these little grooves, that's where all the Mexicans and the Asians, all of that stuff, that's where they fall into. And similar to actual America or whatever, to the white side, these minority groups might not look different to them than this group right here, but these are the ones that their movement and their patterns are compatible with this side of the hand. They're more compatible with this side of the hand than they are to this side of the hand. So they kind of tolerate them and let them do this. As long as you ain't back here, you deal. So yeah, it's weird how it works like that. But me teaching it that way, you can kind of take some of the personal side out of it, and then you can actually be more harmonious, because as opposed to being a racial situation, that now makes you aware that there is a single, we'll call it quote unquote sound, a single signal that has us naturally organized like that. It doesn't have anything to do with personal. So it's like, so we don't have to be cruel to each other about it. It's just like, that's how sand falls in the nodes, right? And so when you're aware of that and you take that personal aspect out of it, you can understand yourself a little bit better, and you can see how we all are part of the same one hand. The sound is the hand. All right. In fact, something that I'm pretty sure not even a lot of Jews know is that so Jew is derived from the name Judah, of course, but Judah itself descends from a root that is associated with the hand Yada, but more importantly, it is Yad and Dalet. So it's like, so Dalet deals with pouring and distribution. So it's not just the hand, it is the distribution of the hand. Oh, don't worry. I'm gonna get way deeper than that before this book is out or whatever. But if you want to have an argument regarding the etymology or the distribution and what Jew is in the scriptural sense versus what it has been made to mean nowadays or whatever, just go back to the scripture, go back to the lettering, go back to the geometry of the lettering and the relationships between the lettering themselves, because they did not leave it up to chance. They were not about to leave something so important up to the average human cognition. There are mathematically supported ways to frame these arguments that don't require you to end up getting personal and putting one person's belief against another. That God ain't leave us stranded like that. All right. Yeah, so I think y'all kind of get this concept of it's the spots that aren't moving that the material falls into. And so if you scale that understanding up, that's essentially what you're seeing with planets and, you know, even atoms and whatever else. It's just that there is a shared pressure, and you can look at it as kind of being like one frequency or sound or whatever, that basically as it interferes with itself, and it interferes with itself in specific patterns, the little areas of pressure where that movement isn't happening, that's where material gathers and it compresses. So it's basically, it's not even like it's material in our experience, but that's only because we operate at a specific scale. We can only see so much because of the limitations of our actual physical body. And so the only thing that is generally significant to us are those things that our brains can interpret as solid and interactive. And so that kind of digs into later conversations I'll have. Oh, my bad. Later conversations I'll have, because if you're coming into any part of this lecture as a 5%er, the vast majority of you are conditioned to, you know, this idea of pretty much running the opposite direction from something that seems quote unquote spooky to you. And at the same time, you know, this kind of mandate to make things simple enough for the babies to understand. Well, like I said before, each one teach one. You've got to understand something thoroughly enough to where you can translate it into making it easier. Like the concepts I'm talking about right now, like I'm pretty sure I haven't lost you too much, you know, but I'm making very advanced concepts that some people get paid a ridiculous amount of money to deal with day in, day out. I'm taking those concepts and I'm compressing them. I don't like using the word simplifying, but I'm compressing them enough to where you can both grasp the thing and there's enough information embedded in there to where as you explore that thing on your own, you can kind of unpack and see the more advanced and more complex levels of it. That's the difference between simplification versus compression. And that is a concept that we really got to get ingrained early on in this conversation, or else this stuff isn't going to be of any value to you. The relationship between the center of this plate and the edges of it, and then everything that we've discussed so far, is compression. So the information that's being projected out onto the surface is contained in just that one little center. So it's unfold. It's like a seed unfolding out into a tree. All the information of that tree and its DNA was contained within that seed. It just had to go through the process of expanding out into the visual plane that we're observing that thing in. But all the information that that outward appearance is being informed by, that's the information is moving relative to. So it's making all its moves relative to that one piece of information. All right. And so it's that concept on which the concept of the Akaraka is based in Igbo culture. So Akaraka. So in general, it is read as destiny, but more important, the word Aka itself means, I believe it's not Aka or Raka. I want to say it's Akara Aka. It's one of the two. But the important aspect of it is that Aka itself means hand. Remember what I just said about Yod. But more importantly, it also means spirit and to branch. Because they understood that the spirit that moves through you, the Ruach, or in the Arabic context, the Ruach, is still connected back to the Supreme. The breath didn't come out of God and then it's just yours and you unconnected to him. It's still connected. You are that. You're not the dust. The dust had to be collected from somewhere else. You're not the stuff in the nodes. You are the sound that's driving those things to the nodes, if you will. You're the pressure that's pushing it into those nodes. It isn't like a body is made and then a soul is added to it. No, the body forms in a material plane relative to the knowledge of the self that is already existent in the essence. So there's nothing spooky about that. If you accept that there's an essence we return to when we die, that's what that information is. The material just simply arranges itself relative to that information. Boom. I just explained the whole concept of the spiritual world, incarnation, all of that in a nutshell. But if you're not able to make the connection yet, we'll continue. So this concept here that we in the West only kind of absorbed in the form of quote unquote breath is more nuanced in the East, whereas we know that spirit itself, spiritus, itself means breath, but it's more like what I was talking about in the beginning, where when you're talking about cosmic breath, it isn't simply like biological breath. It, like, you can bridge the understanding of it, but it is the expansion out from the supreme potential into manifestation, and then returning to a state of awareness of our supreme state. And because we all have the same understanding of that supreme state, we're able to act in unison. So it's like, so the concept isn't to try to become the singularity again, because that is impossible after something is manifested. Instead, it's becoming aware of that state and each of us understanding it as it is, the truth of what it is, in a way to where we can still operate in the material world and be able to understand our connection. And so that is essentially what love is. Like, love is the connection between the Father and the Son, and therefore it is closely associated with the Holy Spirit in the Christian context. But when you bring it over here to the actual practical terminology surrounding that, it's the concept of there being singularity, me having several branches out from that singularity, and then me realizing that all the branches only extend to a certain length. And if I know that the connection between it is the circle. So the circle is how we understand the center of the circle from our own relative position. If I know that my radius from that center, my distance, the distance between me and God is equal to the distance of you and God, then chances are we are simply experiencing the nodes that connect what we're seeing to where we came from. But we're not the path, we're the one that's walking the path in the first place. And we've created a situation for ourselves where my particular path is unique to me, but it's all still headed to the same realization of the center. So the point of this existence is to be physically separated, but because of the knowledge of self, understanding that we are all Allah, we are all arm, leg, arm, head. And then the frequency that makes that a pattern similar like that is 15.66 hertz. That is the octave. So exactly twice. 7.83 hertz, which is the extremely low frequency, or ELF, that is caused by the resonance between the sky and the earth, and that's called the Schumann resonance. So when lightning strikes happen, that vibration continues to bounce back and forth between the Earth's surface and the cavity of the atmosphere. Incidentally, in the East, the words for atmosphere, Akash, that's what spirit actually is. So it isn't. So Akash, you might have heard of Akashic records, all that stuff. It isn't simply space, but it's also atmosphere. So it's atmosphere, spirit, breath, all that falls into that category, because it isn't just the dome that's in the sky. It's the whole thing. So the breath in your lungs is also atmosphere. It's what justifies the space of your lungs. So when you inhale, it's full of air. And then when you push that air out, it's compressing that space such that it naturally pulls that air back in so you can breathe again. So if you can understand that concept, you can more easily understand concepts of reincarnation. Now, resurrection, we only really deal with that in terms of mental resurrection, which is to remember who you are. So remembering that center again. It isn't really of value to the type of being that we are to try to keep the same body in existence, but rather what happens is, because this body was made from the same set of information, when that information re-enters this place, it does attempt to assemble a body that is similar to that, that same information. Well, if all trees essentially came from the same parent plant, like if it was a plant ancestor a long time ago, and then all the future plants came from that, and that one single seed, every single one of them has the same information running through them. But as you can see, because of their position on the planet, because of the conditions they go through, this one's branches may grow in one direction and this one over here may grow in a different direction. But the differences between the two aren't going to be nearly as radical as the difference between a apple tree versus an orange tree. I can group all of these trees over here together because they produce the same fruits. And so likewise, the same frequency produces the same shape. And therefore, what gives us our arm, leg, arm, head, instead of us having shorter legs, shorter arm proportions and a tail and being like this animal or that animal, you may still have, you know, two like arm, two leg type appendages or whatever else. Like the count may be the same, but the specific proportions relative to our body are shared between me and you, regardless of what color we have. So on that basis, up to a certain extent, we have like information. However, let's say that there were never any, that all the people that looked like me were wiped out. And there were only people whose front and back of their hand were that white color right there, and they don't have anything in the middle of the nose. They wouldn't know the significance, like which lines are significant. They might not even think they have lines on their hand until they pay attention to it. There would be no significance to it. But because I preserve this phenotype to show you how the melanin that converts UV light into infrared heat and phonons, so phonons basically the particle of sound, you wouldn't know that it was converting light into sound in a very specific pattern. You would not be able to intuit that. And then once you research it, you'll find that you do actually have melanin inside of those grooves too. It's just mostly pheomelanin. Pheomelanin comes in red and yellowish tones, whereas eumelanin comes in black and brownish tone. Because your blood is also red, you can't really distinguish it. You can't really distinguish the lines like that. But this part that is white, it is just closer to the fossa, it's more closely attached to it, and it's looser in these parts where the melanin gathers. And that actually has an effect on how the signals, the pulse that's sent out, the electrical signal that's sent out by the heart, it actually has an effect on how it arranges the stuff out here. So this concept of the Ruach and whatever else is called the Chi in Odinala in Igbo culture, which is in many ways related to the Ori in Yoruba culture and the Kra in Akan culture. It's related in a lot of ways. But the central concept is, when we think of Chi as life force, and then matter of fact, I could bridge that to Ka in the Egyptian understanding. But yeah, so it's like, so the easiest way to clear it up, especially with Ori, because we know that can mean head, is the way that Resh and its Arabic counterpart Ra are distinguished in Semitic letters, a Semitic understanding. Now we know Ra shares its name with that symbol right there, so that's the circle in the center, but we typically associate that with the sun. However, Ra is not describing the physical sun. He is related to the overall expression of the sun's movement, the field of the sun, if you will, the origin of the sun. Why is that important? Because origin. Resh, so Bereshit, So Resh doesn't just mean head, it means the beginning. So at the head of things, the beginning, the origin. Okay, so in the beginning is saying in the origin, but also in the head. There's an origin in the head. All right, so there's a thought that happens in the mind of God. All right, and so that's the sun we're talking about. We're talking about that inner sun. Like the sun is useless to you outside of your body, as far as perception goes, because every single signal that you've ever seen and you've experienced has all happened within your central nervous system, within your body. Your brain is encased in a completely dark, liquid environment that is held together by the skull, and it relies on electrical signals, electromagnetic signals that are gathered by the sense organs, and it converts that information into electrical and chemical signals that the brain uses to try to recreate what the external environment is. But if something's wrong with your brain, you're going to get a completely different interpretation of what's happening out here. Like things are going to look different, feel different, taste different. You're going to feel water where there's not. Remember on the Ray movie where sometimes he'd walk in the room and feel water on the floor because he was traumatized by his brother drowning? That's what the brain does. It was real to him. All right. So this is all one big shared illusion. So one big hallucination. So I don't want to call it illusion because it's not fake. It's real information, but the way that we interpret it is very specific to us as the type of being that we are. All right. So the importance of me bringing up chi in particular is because the chi is oftentimes personified in Igbo culture because it is your spiritual double. So you have this exact, so they'll reduce it to something like a divine spark or Holy Spirit or whatever else in in other religions, but that is an oversimplification of what this actually is. And then these African cultures just happen to have been more detailed with it, and so that's where some of the confusion comes into play. But it isn't simply a physical mouth was placed on some dirt and blew some air in it, because that's spooky thinking. However, if you understand the concept of an existing potential being the pressure that causes the material universe to arrange in very specific geometrical configurations and continue with that same process for long enough, the human form is, well, first a cell, so a biological cell, and then a human form that unfolds from it with 5 limbs, and on each of those five limbs you have 5 extenders. So from my arm and hand I have 5 fingers that extend from it. That specific branching, or that aka, is an inevitability of universal geometry, especially when you're talking about the collapsing of a sphere along the paths of least resistance, which are the nodes. And remember, I told you the parts you can see here, the lines, are the nodes. That's where the sound is not. So if we've got a central pressure or vibration coming out from a center singularity in the universe or whatever, and it's bouncing back on itself and it's interfering with itself, the shape that we have just happens to be the most like our form is an inevitability. And because of that, those signals can start compressing each other. The interesting thing about that 7.83 hertz Schumann resonance that I said the earth and the atmosphere produce is that that's the exact same frequency range of your brain when you're doing things like performing out-of-body experiences or altered states. So it's like, so this world of ours, that's why it's hard to call it an illusion, maybe a hallucination, because it's like, the image, how we interact with it is produced by the brain, but we're all getting the same image. or whatever. So that's what our reality is. So it's still real. It's just so much of it works without us really having to know how it works, that we just kind of discount the significance of certain parts of it. But if you understand how it's actually operating, that's exactly how you could take something like an understanding of the human body and then translate that into the way the chambers are arranged within a pyramid, such that whenever a person goes in there and they perform specific actions in a specific position at a specific frequency, they will get the same experience. All right. So it's kind of like the opposite of me going to a movie. So when I'm going into a movie theater and there's hundreds of people, we're all having the same experience because we're looking at the same screen. Now take that and then turn that into me, you, and all humans are having at least some overlap in shared experience due to us all having the same kind of movie theater. Each of our brains and our bodies and everything else are rooted in the same exact geometry. It's just that my tree grew over here on this side of the continent, your tree grew on the other side of the continent. So while your branches may have extended out toward the sun a little differently, we were all reaching out toward the same sun, but just from different angles, right? So it's that underlying math that's important, not the thing itself. And so on that foundation, I should be able to bring everything else out of it seeming spooky to you and actually contextualizing it into something that you can make practical in your personal experience. So it's like, so in this first paragraph, I intentionally hit you with a bunch of stuff that sounds out there. If you're not engaged in that conversation regularly, and then even if you are engaged in the specific conversation, you may not understand it from, the level I'm explaining it over here to where you're just like, oh yeah, that. But you can't really explain the things. And so then we're still in a spooky kind of mode. And that's why I'm trying to bridge the gap between those two things. So neither side is just kind of some abstract stuff that you're just memorizing as opposed to something that you can actually experience. All right, so I said something about projecting consciousness into the heavens, admitted the interior's gate by a praying mantis. So, all right, so everything that's in the universe is mirrored with your internal design. Okay, and so when you have these experiences, there's no possible way for you to actually know if you're experiencing what people experience when they're dead, because you're not dead to be able to confirm it. However, if you understand that specific experiences are associated with specific frequencies of signals and specific geometric arrangements of those signals such that they interfere in a particular way, you can somewhat start to understand why people, when they go into these altered states, they tend to see the same exact types of beings. They tend to see the same exact types of locations and stuff like that. So there is an architecture to those things that is not independent of you. There's an architecture to those things that may not necessarily be manifested out here in the physical world, but those relationships are stable in the form of information. So a large part of our existence actually operates in the realm of information theory. Well, what biology is, and this isn't an official definition, this is just me from experience and and dealing with this stuff. The biological experience is essentially where information theory and physics intersect with each other, specifically on those areas that are so error correcting and so self-reinforcing that they actually manifest themselves as something that we can experience in the physical. So for human experience, if I'm being completely honest with you, the only stuff that is inherently useful to us when it comes to things like theoretical physics and just different stuff like this is the stuff that can translate directly into geometric relationships that themselves can be observed already supporting working systems in the world around us. And incidentally, that's pretty much what the Quran is designed to communicate. The whole idea is, so, the Christian church emerges out of the Jewish conversation of Judaism. And what was happening with Christianity was that there was so much speculation and denominization and all of that, like splitting up. There was so much of this because a lot of it was being conducted out of a combination of speculation and shaping the narrative, interpreting the narrative in a way that benefits a political power. And so Islam was supposed to be essentially saying, yeah, there's all of these types of things and blah, 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 and I'm pretty sure you can theorize this thing or that thing, but we need to put some parameters on that to determine what's actually of use to humanity as a whole. Because otherwise, the same knowledge can be abused and you end up with something like the atomic bomb. Right? So that's essentially what, so Islam is mathematics and mathematics is Islam according to our supreme alphabet. But more importantly, it's you being able to shave down the math and the sciences to see which of those things that are actually practical and beneficial to us. Because not all things, like, it's good to have knowledge of things, but things that aren't aligned with the path of your purpose. And that's the point of me bringing up the chi and the akaraka and all that, because it's the chi that from this compressed center is what causes the melanin to spread out using reaction diffusion and then fall into the nodes that it falls into. So that's not accidental. So your palm is unique to you because that is from your divine spark. All right, your connection back to the whole. All right. But anyway, so I say all that to say that the signal, because of the internal geometry of you, certain signals, when they interfere and they interact with the brain, when the brain rearranges it, the subconscious attaches to the symbol or the figure or the archetype that best communicates that thing to you. So it's like, if the only images you understand of angelic energy are, the person in the white robe with the white wings, if you're in an altered state, that's how that energy will present itself. However, if you understand that the Quran distinguishes angels as being pure light that can be it doesn't think for itself. It's like it's guided in a particular way to perform some type of messaging duty for the Supreme. You can understand the concepts of voltage and potential and the directing of that potential and currents and how resistance in specific ways causes light to emanate. If you understand those concepts on a physical level and on the electronics level and stuff like that, you can bridge that to understanding how, if your central nervous system is communicating something very specific to you or whatever, and it's factual and geometrically and mathematically verifiable, that's what information from the source is. Like when we're saying info from the source, that's pretty much what it is. It's something that you could easily verify, both through observation and through scripture, because scripture is essentially a body and collection of experiential knowledge. And if that person has thoroughly tested those things, you can test your experience against it. So it's basically peer reviewing. So the same exact process that you have in the sciences, that's essentially how religion should be operating, more specifically as it relates to scripture. And if it's not doing that, then once again, it's spooky. But I say all that to say that the language that I'm using and the particular figures that I'm using to describe those things here in this paragraph are the way that these ideas have been mapped relative to specific experiences. And so there's a very specific, well-known exercise that is used by people who are learning to read the Akashic records. What is Akashic record? To get away from the mystical explanation of it, the vibratory landscape of the universe is such that every single action sends a ripple through that pressure system. And so that information is essentially always existing. So it's always recorded. And because we live in a universe that operates on resonance, if you can match the energy or the frequency of a specific, we'll say, quote unquote, packet of information, then that information can be made known to you. How does it do it? It simply arranges the signals in your brain according to that frequency, such that the brain does what it naturally does, which is interpret a specific configuration of signals as a specific symbol or figure or archetype. And so over the reason that we keep on ending up with the same kind of gods from between different cultures and stuff like that is because over time human experience has kind of nailed down and whittled down to figure out what, is performing which function and which thing is the messenger on behalf of the whole, and just all of this. And we may slap a human face onto that thing, in our understanding, but that's largely because those who have gone into these altered states where those specific energies and forces are being presented to them in a uniform way, it always shows up with the same attributes. And so it makes you have to ask the question about why we look like this. Why are we shaped like this? Why do we occur in this particular form to each other? And that's because of the type of information that we are. That it's the type of information that our body's being formed around. And so, given the Adam story of the creation of the perfect human, if we know for a fact what the first humans looked like and which traits are associated with them, because we have archaeological evidence, we have geographic evidence, we have all of these things, that's what keeps a narrative from getting spooky. If they keep trying to tell you that they deduced that the Garden of Eden had to be in Mesopotamia because it mentions two rivers, that's only because they don't understand the human body or esoterica enough to understand that the quote unquote two rivers are water courses. And water courses is one of the definitions of Egyptian mer, which also means pyramids. So when it's talking about two pyramids, what it's describing is the right side up pyramid and the upside down pyramid representing the Merkaba. So it's the chariot. And so what the chariot is it's the way that the brain understands the energy that we use to connect to the objective information field of the universe, if you will. So it's like, so to us, we perceive it in our altered state and dreams as being in like this chariot that carries us to different places and different information, but you're not going anywhere. This is all happening inside of you. And then so the brain has an inherent geometric language that it uses to communicate types of information that we can't see with our senses because it's inside of us. and it's operating relative to our specific proportions and geometry. All right, and so anyways, so the two rivers is the balance between the masculine and the feminine. You have two channels that run relative to the spine that we call Pingala and Ida in the yogic sphere. But when you're balancing the two, you're doing the same thing that happens with what's called binaural beats. So if you're not familiar with binaural beats, so binaural beat is when you create a sound file that, so 7.83 hertz is entirely too low for the ear to hear. So instead, I would take, so let's say, what's two numbers the difference of which it said? Let me say I got, so audible range, I think we can we hear 100 hertz? I think we can hear 100 hertz. Oh, so let's do 200 just to be safe. So let's say I take that 10, 7, 1, 2, 9, 1. All right, so let's say I put that in one ear, and then on the other side, hold on, no. I'm doing that wrong. I need to divide it by 2. So anyway, so what I would do, I would take like that 7.83, divide it in half, which should be something like 3.9. So say like that's like around like 3.9 hertz. And then I would take that 200 frequency, and in my left ear, I would have 200 hertz minus the 3.9. And then in my right ear, I would have 200 hertz plus the 3.9. And so the average between those, the average distance between those two frequencies would round out to my 7.83 hertz. So if that makes sense to you, what it's saying is, instead of me trying to listen to this inaudible frequency as a single frequency, I have two signals that the distance between them is exactly that frequency, such that they cancel each other out except for this, and the brain picks that up. Okay? And so the brain is basically creating a phantom signal in the center using those two things. And so that's how you get the brain hemispheres, the left and the right, to work together and become entrained. Once they are entrained, the part of your brain that handles like literal logical information, and then the part that makes sure it collects all of the information, are then able to interact, and then that gives you access to the experience of what is called in the Islamic world alam al-mithal. I can almost guarantee that the vast majority of what people are talking about when they're talking about OBEs, out of body experiences, they're talking about going to the other side and all that, at least the initial levels, because it's high levels like the Malkuth and all of that. This is what they're talking about. And then I recently just got this terminology for it, but I'm absolutely positive that this is what I've been referring to personally as the myth space. Because that's essentially what it is. What myths are is actually how you experience the space. So it's like you experience the objective information, like the you have the same locations, the same buildings, but there's additional information. And that additional information gets personified as different parts of yourself, really, or whatever. So it's like, so the different forces acting on you and the different elements of nature within that space, when you're in that state, those things occur to you as if they are actual beings. So don't get it twisted that it's something separate from yourself, but you get to experience it as if it's separate from yourself, because it's more useful for us to collect information in that way. But this is well documented within Sufism. It is a part of Islam, but it's just one of those things where you're supposed to check with scripture to make sure that what you're seeing is not something that's being made up by your mind, but it's actually the signals of the brain bouncing off of something that's actually there, if you will. That's the best way I can start introducing how any of that stuff is not just spooky or just something I've heard or read about. Like, this is stuff I've actually learned how to do, and I understand why it doesn't work in other situations. I understand why our brains work that way, like the whole mechanics, and I understand exactly why people in the past have recorded those things with the language that they use for it. But it is very real, but very little understood, and it's very important because it's there regardless of whether you care about it or not, and it does determine a lot of things about how human behavior operates. And people who have mastered this stuff, we know the breakdown of the 85%, the 10%, and the 5%. Not everybody that has this information uses it for good. And if you're one of those people who are good but you don't know this stuff, you have no idea when it's being used against you, and you're not shielding yourself properly from that. And so when you get that feeling that it looks like no matter how much effort we put forth, to get out of our situation, it seems like we still there, and somehow we want to blame it on them other folks, and we can't figure out exactly what they're doing or how they're doing it. So it ain't like you could take legal action. That's the exact place they would want you to be in if something like that was happening. They need you in a place. It's gaslighting. It's basically having you in an impossible situation and operating from a control booth that you don't even know exists. So you don't even have to have it as some spooky Illuminati, the hidden, faceless, whatever, pulling the strings behind the scenes. We're all in the exact same control booth. It's just you're not even willing to acknowledge that the control booth exists, because you can't learn about it until you acknowledge that it exists to begin with, and then go through the step, like find out, okay, well, if this thing exists, how am I supposed to get there? What should I be seeing? Is that consistent every time? Like, you have to be a scientist about this stuff. So a lot of things that we consider to be spooky aren't fake at all. It's just that you haven't investigated thoroughly enough to be able to convert the logic to it. And one of the Quranic principles says that, and I was asking about this because, I grew up in a more Christian context, so I'm having to learn how it relates to, Judaism and how it connects to Islam and all of that. And, and I'm versed in Eastern systems like Tai Chi and Qigong and yoga and just different stuff like that. So it's like, so I have enough of an understanding of the broader spectrum of spirituality to see what is connected, what's disconnected, what everybody contains the same body of information. It's just, how did it grow over here? How did it grow over there? Why don't I understand or recognize the language or the symbols when it's over here versus over here? And so in me understanding that, getting the opportunity to kind of bring it back to where, it ain't just spooky stuff. But anyways, so finding carbuncle. Carbuncle is this shape right here. You've seen it before. You've seen it everywhere. That's what a carbuncle is. Carbuncle is also a word used for garnet. So those red stones. And there's a specific chemical reason for that. If you want to go on a rabbit hole about that stuff and the philosopher's stone and all that good stuff, do that right there. But for our purposes, this idea of a circle being divided up into 8 parts such that every single one of those parts, those angles, is 45 degrees. So that it has 8 steps. That is a important geometry, especially if you're a Christian, because you know what? You know why? If Traditionally, baptismal pools are octagonal. And they're filled with water, so they do that exact same thing I'm talking about right here. So it creates a pattern. It bounces off of that. Some that resembles something like this, but probably a little more nuanced than that. Like it's probably a little bit and stuff. But those ripples, that pattern that it makes, your body recognizes that you have certain connections happening within your body that are associated with that, and so it just helps the brain kind of attune to that, if you will, or whatever. So that's a whole thing that I could get into, but we'll do that another time. So that's the feminine. So that's the feminine aspect that gets you connected to the Holy Spirit and basically be able to resonate with your divine spark in such a way that you can move relative to it. That's the easiest way I can put that. That's a whole lesson to demystify in and of itself. All right, so all of this experience, case in point, there's certain ways that you can access the Akashic record, and there's certain aspects of it that are consistent, and that's all I'm describing here is what I experienced, research to see what causes that, and turn out to be existing stuff. So it's like, oh, okay, well, something happening here. May not know in its entirety until, I train a little bit more, but that's exactly what's happening. And so one of the key things that you start to recognize early on and learning this stuff is that you cannot bring any of that back to anybody else. Like I can't show you what I see on the other side. So the only thing I can do is to give you my accounts, show you how I got there, and then by you performing the practice yourself, you can see what things align with your own experience. If you're getting the exact same information that I'm getting, there's something to that. And if you're not getting the same thing, you can have a conversation with me to see whether there's something different that you're doing that prevented you from getting the same result. So that's exactly what any scientific method, whatever any scientific process would go through. That's exactly what you'll be doing. The great work is, of course, and the other side, of course, terminology used by Darius J. Wright, who I trained with for controlled out-of-body experience training. It's pretty popular on YouTube. If you've never heard of him, make sure you check him out and his Great Work Summit and all that stuff that just started. I'm not too actively engaged with that community because once I encountered my chi and learned what my destiny was in terms of cleaning up this language like I'm doing right now, I knew what I needed to know. Like, there's a lot of stuff you can do on the other side. I don't do out of body that often. Like, it's a lot of people that they're just into it because they just want to see, ooh, what's this, what's that. Nah, find out what you're supposed to be doing, and if it ain't got nothing to do with all that extra stuff, all you're gonna do is confuse people when you come back over here. And that's why you gotta have these parameters that you could use so that you're not confusing people more than you're helping them. Because for some people, it's not enough for them to know that there's something on the other side. You got to cultivate the type of heart in people to where they ain't over there abusing that information, which is why everybody don't know it. Because you know how some of y'all are. Some of y'all wild. So anyways, a real life experience. I went to this isn't a metaphor. Like, I literally traveled to Tennessee and went to Sadhguru's Kashi Ashram. See what was up with that. Went to the ashram here nearby where I live and stuff. And soon after, I ended up finding out about this guy Stan Tenen. Talked about him in other lectures before. If you do not know who this fella is, goodness gracious, I wouldn't blame you. But I can't say he's the most popular person in the world. But to those who know, The work that this man did, there are a lot of ridiculous. See, he's one of these people. He's exactly like what I was doing. Well, I wasn't looking for anything in particular. It's just that I recognized patterns and I investigated said patterns, and we came to very similar conclusions on things. And come to find out that a lot of the stuff that he's describing relative to the Semitic alphabets and their relationship to hand signs and positions within a toroidal field. So toroid, that's the 3D donut shape. A lot of those exact same things are found in Igbo culture and Odinala in their artifacts and things. So they've known this stuff for thousands of years. And so the same story that is being associated with the creation of the Hebrew and Arabic fire letters is what they call those letters that you recognize. That's the same story that they tell in West Africa. And because these people have not had contact with each other in thousands of years, that means that they had a shared culture somewhere along the lines or whatever. So there's a precursor to these cultures. And just because one particular group has a lot more PR on the matter, it doesn't mean it all belongs to them or originates with only them. And that's kind of the struggle that we have in the world right now, because you have one particular set of people who thinks they've got the say on the whole thing, and you know, they own the whole thing, but it's like, it's, you know, we all had it. It's just that, you know, you preserve the language in a particular way. All right, but there's a lot of details that you don't have simply because you're not putting the pieces together. Everything was divided. Everybody only got a piece of the story. You need everybody's pieces in order to see the whole geometry. You can't determine the whole geometry just from a single face, because this right here, from one angle, I might think it's just a regular old 2D square. But until I tilt that bit, I might not realize it's got these other faces hiding behind it to make a cube. All right, I only see one face. You need all the faces of the cube. All right, but anyways, I found out about Stan and the Meru Foundation. Go to their site, look them up, learn as much as you can about that. It's foundational to everything we're talking about. Oh, no, I said foundation, but all I wanted to talk about is foundation. Okay, yeah, some Stan Tenen and the Meru Foundation. All right. Remember that word Mer I was talking about with the pyramid? So that's where Meru comes from. So it's the plural of that. So pyramids, water courses, desert, all of those. So if I've got courses that's going through a desert, that gives us sand, that gives us paths, pyramid resonance. This is what it's talking about. That shape right there, that square with the X, that is how a pyramid looks from above. Okay? That's the apex, that's the four corners of it. This is tricky esoteric stuff. If once you know, you can't unsee it, but until somebody shows you, sometimes you have no flipping idea. No flipping idea, mate. Okay, anyway, moving right along, because it's getting along. All right, so that's some of the stuff from Stan's site. So from the Meru Foundation site, where he's showing how the Hebrew letters, and these are the Arabic ones here, but the same type of deal, where it's like they're formed from different projections within this geometry of the tetrahedron. So the tetrahedron is otherwise known as a four-sided pyramid. And the reason why that particular geometry is so important is because it kind of determines how the sphere of our planet releases energy. So if you inscribe, which means to encircle, a tetrahedron into a sphere, there's a particular latitude, which is 19.471 degrees, and this goes for both north and south. So around that ring of the earth, it's like it releases a ton of energy that causes things like you'll find granite hills and stuff like that, and volcanic activity a lot of times. It's not exclusive to the earth. It's just a quirk of spherical bodies in general, because the same latitude is where the eye on Jupiter is located. It's where Olympus Mons, the Mount Olympus on Mars, it's the largest in the known universe, I think they say, or whatever. So whatever volcanic activity was happening there, if there were people there, I see why they're not there anymore. But anyway, anyways, as far as we go, the reason that that parallel is important is because on the African continent, that line, so this is the equator here, that line of 19.47 in the south. So all right, so where the Nile is, so you know the Nile it runs from Central Africa up to the Mediterranean, so it's backwards like that. The place where it intersects the Nile, so the north one, so 19.471 north, it intersects the Nile in the middle of Nubia, in a very specific spot that has tons of granite. Got this beautiful black granite that they build stuff out of. So if I go directly south until I hit 19.471 south, I get the exact hill, the exact location where Great Zimbabwe was built. So if you didn't know, Zimbabwe has this like amazing like fortress type joint. There where civilization, great civilization was, and it's built with granite but no mortar. Like the geometry is so perfectly cut and fit together that it did not even need any mortar to glue the bricks together or whatever. Like this, and this thing has stood, you know, ever since it was made. So this is next level type stuff. But these two very important civilizations in African history, because you know Nubia was a rival to Egypt, and then Nubians even took over Egypt during the 25th dynasty or whatever. So these ain't no slouches. These right here are along these exact geometric lines. And so if these are formed by these tetrahedrons, they're actually the lines associated with the Merkaba. Okay, so this is why this symbol is so important. And so the rotations of this thing, and so field lines flowing through this thing, so it's showing how energy flows through it. So when they're talking about fire letters, they're talking about the fire, the magma and stuff inside the earth. They understood this vibrationally because our body's a microcosm of it. You see that triangular orientation, that's you with your legs crossed. So if you're sitting with your legs crossed, you see how this kind of looks like your spine going up the center here and your hip. It's you with your legs crossed. So when you send energy through yourself while in that position or whatever, it's basically doing the exact same thing that energy does throughout the earth and tectonics. And so this is part of the reason why Jesus's occupation, you learned it as a carpenter or something, but the actual Greek word they use is tecton, and tecton is also the source of tectonics when you're talking about the shifting of the plates of the planet. So you're changing the shape of something. That's why he's called a carpenter. All right, and then you can look at the that tetrahedron inside the earth The tetrahedral arrangement of energy inside the earth as being like a child inside of a womb. So Mother Earth, Mother Mary. All right, there you go. I'm not saying that one is the other, but both operate on the exact same principle. The exact same principle of the human womb is how the inside of the earth operates. The universe is lazy like that. So whatever worked in the beginning when everything was being arranged, it just copies that over and over on smaller and smaller scales. Bada bing, bada boom. All right, so here I talk about Stan, and the stuff that he was discovering was happening right in the midst of when Allah was operating, when he was shaping and building and expanding the 5% nation, and developed the supreme mathematics and supreme alphabet. Martin Luther King was shot the same weekend that Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke put out 2001: A Space Odyssey, and that is chock full of symbolism. If you understand esoteric symbolism, everything I'm talking about is embedded somewhere in that movie. It is wild once you know. And like I said, Arthur C. Clarke and Kubrick, this movie is released. Let me see if I remember the timeline here. I believe it was released on a particular day. I want to say Martin Luther King had his final speech the day after that, the I've been to the mountaintop speech, where he incidentally talks about flying over all these different historical locations. And it sounds a lot like what shamans and OBE practitioners do when you listen to it through that lens. Not saying that's what he was doing, but I'm just saying that's how it sounds like once you know about this stuff. But anyways, he has that speech, and then the day after he is assassinated. And then instead of black people going to the movies and seeing 2001: A Space Odyssey and catching all these clues that they putting out there, they are instead in the streets rioting because Dr. King had just got shot. And Allah happened to be one of those people who was commended for helping to bring order back to our communities during that time. All right, getting them to, like, hey, stop rioting and messing up your own neighborhood and stuff. And so you got a commendation from the mayor and all that as a result. All right, so we're not gonna get too much into this today. I'm gonna wrap this up in a minute, but here I'm basically introducing the logic that I was following when I started constructing this thing that shouldn't exist. Like, how it's possible without some intention is beyond me. Like, I don't want to think of it as, oh, this is something I was destined to reveal and it's never been revealed before. I like to think that this was actually the thought that went into the designing of this in the first place, but I'll let you be the judge surrounding that. But basically, by, watching what he was doing with the tetrahedron and the letters and stuff, I did this experiment where I took the tetrahedron and I put the letters. So the English, so our A is the same as in the Supreme alphabet, and this is essentially you can call it the Latin A, but it is derived from the Phoenician Aleph. So the same symbol. And in fact, that's exactly how I placed it inside of this thing for the most part. All right, but anyway, so I had the A, I got the Hebrew Aleph, so that would be their A, so to speak. It's often transliterated as an E when it appears in words, but that's all right. So, like, for instance, El, like Elohim, is actually spelled Aleph and Lam. All right, so it's more like olives, but so it's really like olives. So that's why we end up with Al-Ilah, which gets shortened to Allah. So same thing, the Supreme. It's the name of the Supreme. So if you one of them Christians or somebody that talking about, I don't know nothing about no Allah. I know my God. It's the same word. It's just that it's in Arabic. That ain't me trying to flatten them into the same thing. I'm telling you, they come from the exact same source, the exact same information, the exact same language group. So please quit with the madness. All right. And speaking of alif, so the Arabic form is something basically like this. All right. And then to you as an English speaker, this probably looks like the word Ani to you, which just happens to be one of the names. So Ani / Allah. Oh, interesting, right? Happens to be the name for the earth in, we'll get into that a little bit more. So in Igbo language. But anyways, but all these are the A of their respective language. English, we'll use that supreme alphabet, Hebrew, Arabic. And so what I did, just for kicks, I put the alif right here. I flipped it around. So I kept turning this thing. So I had it like this, and then I would turn it like this, and then I would draw the left in there so that it's, it's touching the edges. All right, and then I would turn it again like this, and then I would position my A in it according to where the edges were, like this. Okay, and so I end up getting this figure as a result that looks like get a figure that looks something like this right here. And it's seeing to me, initially it started to look kind of like a little man or something that was running or something. I couldn't quite figure out what it was at first. It's not clear here, so you can't make no conclusion off of that there, because you have to reach a little bit. But you could see how I could see something like that looking kind of like a little man running or something. Like this is a horrible representation of it, but it's close enough for you to kind of see what I'm talking about. It was interesting enough for me to continue experimenting with it, but not yet enough to make any sound conclusion or whatever. And so as I said, let's see, so tetrahedron letter, how far did I go in here? I don't want to overstep what's in the next. 2D, I placed each letter simulating the spiral of the galaxy, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so I spin. So essentially, like you saw, I was spinning this thing. So in my head, I was rotating the tetrahedron. So the tetrahedron, as a platonic solid in Greek thought, it represents fire and it represents will. And as I get into it a little later, in Semitic languages, they read from right to left. And so Ani, reflected, is Ina, which means fire in Yoruba. So we got Ani, that means earth. And then we got Ina, that means fire. All right. So their religion, Odinala, which is typically translated as "it's in the earth." It is a clever compression of Odi, meaning womb or dark. Ina, fire. So remember the black fire on white fire. That's how they describe the creation of the Torah. And then we have the earth. Odi-Ina and Ani. It's also called Odinala as well. So Odinani or Odinala. Because Allah is earth, Ani is earth, same word. So Odinani, Odi-Ina, Ani. Inani itself actually means the same thing as John. But it means gift or number in Bantu languages. So the gift of numbers. So in the womb of Allah, in the center of the earth, we have fire. And from this fire, we get numbers. So that's how we got everything we just talked about. 19.471 degrees based on a tetrahedra inscribed into a globe. That is where Great Zimbabwe is. This is where the great kingdom of Kush was. And in the dead center, near the equator, only about a degree to the west from there, is where the Ishango bone was discovered in western Uganda. And there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there and stories that inspire Wakanda and whatever else. But it's all tied together. That's what I'm telling you. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next one. But that's basically the basis of everything we're talking about. We're gonna tie this so these letters, if you're thinking of letters as sound, the nodes between the sounds and then the pronunciation is the actual sound. This starts to give you an idea of how the brain actually maps this stuff and how you're actually building geometric structures when you learn language and when you name things, whatever. So this is just a tip of the iceberg, but I hope it's starting to kind of give you an idea of how in-depth the ancient world was and why we suck today at interpreting something like a Bible and whatever else. And that's how we end up fighting with each other instead of understanding what was being communicated in the first place. All right, but on that note, I will catch you in the next episode. If you haven't already, like, subscribe, share this stuff. If you haven't actually read the book yet or watched the first season, go back and check out all that so you're not completely lost. And if you haven't, this is perfectly fine for you to just wait till you see this whole season to go back and then read the book or go through the lecture, because it's going to be an entirely different journey for you if you know this stuff and you recognize how it's being organized within the book itself. I might even, will I have to do a season 3 where I'm going back to the Canticle and showing you how it sounds and how it occurs now that you know the stuff once I finish this? Maybe. We'll have to see how time is looking, because I got some big things coming up, but we'll see. But anyways, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.